God instructs us to test everything and hold on to the good. So stay tuned, because tonight we're going to do some testing on the Book of Mormon on polygamy. What love is this?
She was born into polygamy. Her family followed the teachings of Joseph Smith. All of them, including plural marriage, especially plural marriage. Like many young girls, she had been promised to a man who was her father's age. But she fled. She ran away. She preferred an eternity of outer darkness to a life of polygamy. She chose hell over religious enslavement. That girl was me. After I fled, I thought I was free, but I realized I wasn't free. I was lost, alone, desolate. No home, no hope, no life. Then Jesus Christ found me and rescued me, and He loved me. In His love, I found real freedom, a real home, a real life. And Jesus offers you the very same thing. He is a shield to all who will take refuge in Him. He has been a refuge for me, and He can be for you too. Knowing the surpassing love of Jesus Christ today, this is why I can look back and ask, polygamy, what love is this?
Welcome to our show tonight. This is Polygamy, What Love Is This? And I am your host, Doris Hanson, and we are grateful that you have decided to share some of your evening with us tonight. You know, we've had several requests for a copy of the quotes that we used on last week's show. And for those who are interested in those quotes, you can go to our website, whatloveisthis.tv, and scroll down just a little tad, and it'll show a link there that says show notes and references, and click on that link and you will be able to retrieve those notes from the show last week with all the quotes. We also receive requests from time to time from people who are looking for a church in their area, one that they can trust, and one that they can, if they're seeking the truth and they want to be able to know that they're going to a good place. And so, you know, we'd love to help you do that. If you want to email us at tv@aboutpolygamy.com with your geographic location, we'll be happy to refer you to a trustworthy, Bible-believing, non-compromising church in your area. And we'd also like to remind those in Utah County that the Utah County Outreach Meeting for those who are questioning Mormonism and seeking the biblical Jesus Christ is going to be next Tuesday, November 15th at 6 p.m. You can contact Lewis at 801-374-8489 or email way61@hotmail.com. And again, we urge those who are seeking the alternative from Mormonism or from a polygamy group, and you need support, you need people who have been there and done that, you need the help, and so we urge you to find a support group and go to it, because you will find that it'll give you much strength and wisdom. And our support group will be meeting November 28th, our discussion group, November 28th at 6:30 p.m. You can email us tv@aboutpolygamy.com for more information about that. And we would like to say tonight, well done, Texas. They've done it again. Frederick Merrill Jessup was found guilty and sentenced to 10 years in prison and $10,000 fine for performing an illegal marriage when he sealed his own 12-year-old daughter as a plural wife to Warren Jeffs. And on November 1st, 45-year-old Leroy Johnson Steed pleaded no contest to sexual assault of a child and 2 counts of bigamy. He was sentenced to 7 years for each count to be served concurrently. And Wendell Nielsen, the 71-year-old one-time president of the FLDS, pleaded no contest to 3 counts of bigamy. He received 10 years probation on his penalty of 3 10-year concurrent prison sentences. And so we say 3 cheers for Texas. 3 men in the past, less than 2 weeks, and they are the ones, it seems, that has the courage to go forward and bring justice when it is needed. You know, ever since Joseph Smith said that the Book of Mormon was a historical record of the Native Americans, whom he called Lamanites, Mormon leadership has propagated the same idea that all Native Americans have a Hebrew lineage. However, several years ago, new information was discovered about the true origin of the people that the Book of Mormon calls Lamanites. Now, this information has developed through the science of DNA, and when DNA research results are compared to the claims of Mormon prophets and to the teachings of the Book of Mormon, we find that there are some huge contradictions and impossibilities in reconciling their claims with the evidence. Because the Book of Mormon is a beloved book and it is held in high esteem by both Mormons and Mormon fundamentalists, we deemed that it was highly appropriate to dedicate a show on this DNA evidence and give the regular uninformed Mormon and or polygamists the opportunity to see the evidence and come to their own conclusions of the veracity of the claims of the Book of Mormon. So to explain and to help understand this information is our guest tonight. He's been a guest before on our show, is Pastor Jim Catlin, who pastors the Main Street Church in Brigham City. And we welcome you and thank you for coming again. And we're sure you'll be back again.
It's great to be back. Yeah, it's fun. I prefer being behind the cameras, but this works. It's great.
It works good. And you've got a lot of good information with this.
Yeah.
And while we were discussing putting the show together, we discussed to make it as simple as possible, which will allow for the man on the street to understand a complicated science.
Yeah.
But you're a pastor of the Main Street Church in Brigham City. What's your connection with the DNA issue?
Well, yeah, that's a good question, because a lot of people are thinking, he teaches the Bible, so why is he doing this? Well, some people know about the video, DNA versus the Book of Mormon. That came out of our church in 2003, I think it was. Mm-hmm. And about the same time, I landed there, too. And almost simultaneously, a book was coming out through Signature Books by Simon Southerton. In fact, and they sent us a galley proof. That's what this is right here. It's the pre-printed version of it to check through it. And it was my job there to go through the science of this and just to see if it jived well with what we did in our video. And also, my background is primarily scientific. Mm-hmm. So I have a couple of engineering degrees. So science is
So you have a
science.
mind for that kind of thing.
It doesn't scare me. Let's put it that way. So I said, well, okay, I'll do that. So I studied that book then, and then ever since then have been just keeping up on the issue and seeing where it's gone since 2003.
Okay, good. Yeah. So why did the science of DNA become a problem for the Book of Mormon?
Well, if you remember the Book of Mormon story, Joseph Smith wrote the Book of Mormon in 1830, and at the time there was lots of speculation about where the American Indians came from, and probably the most popular speculation was that they were Hebrew, and it was not just a few people; a lot of people like to talk about that. So he comes up with the Book of Mormon, he publishes it, and sure enough, there's quote unquote anthropological proof that they are Hebrews. It comes out; it's very popular. The problem is that no one could really check him on that particular truth. There was no way to scientifically check it in 1830. Mm-hmm. But then in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, we can actually check that. So this is one of those wonderful places where science and faith in a way overlap enough that we can say, are both of those sides take on reality the same? Because they should be the same.
Mm-hmm. So does the Book of Mormon actually say that the current Native Americans are of Hebrew lineage?
Yeah. In fact, I would say if anyone who's done a cursory reading of the Book of Mormon, like back in 2005, remember the challenge was read the Book of Mormon this year. This is the anniversary of Joseph Smith. If you read through it, that's the backbone theme, that there were some folks that came from the Middle East, from Israel, Lehi specifically in 600 BC, came over here with his sons. They populated this area. They filled the land basically, and but they are from the Middle East. And then you add to that the fact that there's Mulekites that are there and who also came from Israel. And so you have basically this book that says if you run into a Native American today, you're running into a descendant of a Hebrew immigrant here from from 600 BC. That's what you find. And in fact, it's stated if we take a look at the title page in the Book of Mormon, and I think we've got a graphic for this. The title page for the Book of Mormon actually says that's why it's put together. Joseph Smith wrote this. This is from the 1830 edition, so it's the very first one. He says, "Wherefore it is an abridgment of the record of the people of Nephi, and also of the Lamanites, written to, take note, written to the Lamanites, which are a remnant of the house of Israel. So this book you're holding in your hands, he's saying, is written for the benefit of the Lamanites who are alive at the time the book comes into their hands. And so that's why the book is written. So there's this fundamental understanding from Joseph Smith that this history is for the benefit of the remnant Lamanites who are still alive. If you also go to the introduction, in 1981, this introduction was added to the front of the Book of Mormon, and it explains a summary of that. It talks about the Jaredites who had come much earlier, but it says that after thousands of years, all the Jaredites were destroyed except the Lamanites, and they are the principal ancestors of the American Indians. So that was added in 1981 just to set the stage for what the whole Book of Mormon is about. So yes, indeed, the backbone of the Book of Mormon message is you see an Indian today, you're seeing a Jew.
From the Hebrew. So now, were there other ancestors, other peoples that are mentioned in the Book of Mormon that also contributed to the genetics of the current Native Americans?
Yeah, and I mentioned one, the Mulekites. You won't find the name Mulekites anywhere in the Book of Mormon, but you'll see they're called the people of Zarahemla. And they came independent of Lehi, but about the same time. They came to the Americas the same way by a boat. But they were, according to the Book of Mormon, they were very Jewish because Mulek was actually a son of King Zedekiah, who was the king of Judah at the time. So we're talking
he'd be the
king of
the
Judah.
royal line there.
And then we also mentioned the Jaredites. The Jaredites came much earlier. They came roughly 2,500 years before Jesus. So it's kind of hard to figure the Jaredites in the Book of Mormon story because they don't figure because they were all wiped out before Lehi and the Mulekites were there. Well, that's not exactly true. They overlapped a tiny bit with the Mulekites. Their king was the last survivor, and he lived with the Mulekites for about 9 months. But other than that, so that's the only three groups that are mentioned in the Book of Mormon, the Lehites, the Mulekites, and the Jaredites, and that's it. So basically, the two groups that figure prominently, they have Jewish descent.
Okay. So now modern genetic scientists have tested the Native Americans. What'd they find?
Well, they've, as of even 5 or 6 years ago, they've tested over 7,000 Aboriginal people in North, Central, and South America. So people that they are pretty sure have been here for a long time.
So it would be the Lamanite people that the Book of Mormon identifies as Lamanites.
And they tested their DNA, and they found that sure enough, there is no Jewish DNA at all. But what they find is that these people, they absolutely agree on everything that they found between both secular and LDS scientists believe on what they found.
So what DNA did they find?
Well,
where are they from?
Found out that their DNA matches DNA that you find in southern Siberia or Mongolia today. That's what they found.
Okay.
Yeah.
So no Hebrew DNA, but...
No Hebrew DNA. No Hebrew DNA. No.
Okay.
And this is agreed upon. I was kind of ahead of myself. Secular geneticists accept this, and LDS geneticists accept this. I mean, there's no disputing. The science itself has settled well enough that everyone says, yep, you pull out a piece of DNA out of a native Aboriginal person in North, Central, South America, it will match some you find in Mongolia. Yeah.
Now, I want our viewers to understand more about this science of DNA, which we're going to get to in a little bit. But first of all, I want to explain, I want to ask you a question. 2 or 3 weeks ago...
I know this is going.
2 or 3 weeks ago on Heart of the Matter,
right.
Sean McCrady's show, he was talking about DNA. And a caller claimed in, and I was watching the show, and he claimed in and he said that modern chemistry, which he was referring to DNA, was an outgrowth of alchemy. Did I say that correctly? Alchemy. Which is an ancient occultic practice. And he wondered, this caller wondered why we would use the occult of alchemy as a science against the Book of Mormon when occult is damned by God in the Bible.
Anti-Christian,
So in your dabbling in science, what do you say to this complaint?
Yeah, I was screaming at the TV when I heard that. Because my background, I am emerging of a science world and a faith world in that sense. And I guess at its best, on both sides, religion and science, at its best, both ought to be telling us what reality is.
Yeah.
The problem is that much of what is part of the reality of the nature of things is hidden. I mean, we can't look inside of our bodies without a microscope. Well, science tries to reveal the nature of things through a very disciplined process of eliminating things that don't matter. I mean, in its best, it's actually a very good, trustable thing. There are fallen people that run it sometimes, and that can bring you bad stuff. But when you hold to the scientific method, you reveal some extraordinary things by using that discipline. Now, in the same way, faith and what we understand through what God tells us, if God is our creator, which I believe he is, then he probably has a better take on the nature of the reality of creation than any of us do. I mean, he's transcendent in that sense. So if God tells me something about the nature of things, say in the Bible, it ought to probably be just as true as science when it's done well. Those two worlds, when they can overlap, should overlap and say one thing about reality, because there's only one reality.
Right.
So I would just say when it comes to science, use it cautiously, use it with discipline, and you'll probably get to truth.
But does ancient alchemy really have anything to do with modern day science?
Alchemy is hocus pocus.
Like he was charging.
Alchemy was trying to turn lead into gold, and we know you can't do that.
So he's claiming that the DNA science was using that kind of hocus pocus to get to the DNA.
And that's a whole different realm.
And that's not true.
No, whole different realm.
Okay, so if our viewers watching tonight, then he might have these questions.
Well, he might call in and shout at us too, but but that's okay. We can talk science. I don't worry about science like a lot of people do, probably because I have a lot of science training. But it's just when it's done well, it's done well. So absolutely.
Well, God is for scientists. So anyway, tell us more about the science of DNA.
Okay, well let's talk about what they do. What happens is in your system, DNA. Of course, DNA is an encoding of how you're made. And largely the DNA molecule is encoded in a sequence, and that sequence is used to build things in your body like proteins and stuff like that. The amazing thing is that your body and my body have a DNA that instructs how our bodies should work, and that whole instruction set is about 3 billion pieces long. I mean, if you think about it, I always think about these toys my kids used to have when they were little. We used to call them pop beads, I think it was, and they're little plastic beads you could hook together in a chain. And there are different shapes, different colors and stuff like that. That's kind of like what DNA is in a way, but it's 3 billion of those long. Well, there's a nice, tiny little piece of DNA that was discovered that we use for genealogical stuff, and it's called mitochondrial DNA. Instead of being 3 billion pieces long, it's only 16,000, which sounds like a lot. It sounds like a lot. And it's actually a link of these things twisted into a circle, into a ring. In fact, I think I've got a graphic for this to put on the screen. There it is, very technical. That's what the long chain is around the edge, and it folds it on itself like a ring, and it's got 16,000 little spots that create that entire ring. Now, the things you see on the screen that are green, those are data that encode proteins, and in fact, that's in current day discussions about evolution and stuff like that. It's a key problem because we don't know any way that proteins are made without information from DNA. So where did the first DNA come from to make the first protein? But anyway, those green things show proteins, how to encode proteins. The orange and yellow sections are how to encode different kinds of RNA, just recombinant DNA. But right at the top of the screen, there's a little blue section. See that little blue section called the control section? And if you think of this, that little section is only about 1,000 pieces long. And that little blue section up there is what genealogists use to track whole races of people as they go around the world. Now, the reason why this works is because that ring that's inside every one of the mitochondria in your cells, that ring you got from your mother. You did, I did, we all did. We got it from our mothers. It doesn't come from our fathers, just from our mothers. So mothers pass it on to daughters. Daughters become mothers. They pass it on to their daughters. Those daughters become mothers. So it's called a matrilineal line. What's nice about it is that when that mitochondrial DNA gets passed on mother to daughter and down the line, it doesn't change. It stays fixed. And so, the thinking listener is going to say, well, then we all have the same mitochondrial DNA, right? No. Well, why not? Well, because over many generations, that little blue section in the top, those 1,000 pieces, a small, slight variation will happen, just a random chance, and one of those things will go bloop and change to something else. And it'll stick, and that'll be passed on mother to daughter, mother to daughter, mother to daughter. It happens so infrequently that if you sample people's little blue section in their mitochondrial DNA and you see where all the little switches are, you can find out what large part of the family tree they belong to.
Wow.
So, and it's just in that little 1,000 section. In fact, if you go get your DNA tested right now for genealogical purposes, they'll test half of that blue section and look for those little clicks to see what they are.
Yeah. Interesting.
And so here's a picture right here of a world map. And this is how they've discovered, using the mitochondrial DNA, where people have come from. Now, this is a map of the world you've probably never seen before. We're hovering above the pole, the Arctic pole, the North Pole, and looking down in the world. South America's on your far right, Australia's on the bottom left, Africa's on the top left. But those lines show where certain ones of these mitochondrial DNAs with the specific little ticks in them have traveled all around the world. So if you look on the right, South America, I don't think you can see it well on your screen, but there are 4 different specific tick groups. They're called haplotypes, haplogroups, that show up in South America, Central America, and in North America. And those 4 different combinations are virtually account for 96 to 98% of all the samplings of Native Americans here.
Oh, my goodness.
And so it makes sense it'd be in South America, Central America, North America. Now, we're talking all the Native Americans, regardless of tribes, are one of those 4 types. But then as you go to the left, across through Alaska, across the Bering Strait, you find these things actually starting in Siberia. So that's how scientists have looked at these slight little variations in that control section of mitochondrial DNA, which should never change, but they do over many generations. And they say, listen, if we find an entire hemisphere of people that have 4 kinds of these specific little variations, and we find them nowhere else except in Mongolia and southern Siberia, then they probably came from there. So when you look at that DNA, do you find DNA that comes from the Middle East? No. You find it coming from Mongolia.
This is kind of a nail in a coffin, isn't it?
Well, it kind of is.
So
it kind of is.
How mainstream? How is that? Now, this is science. How mainstream is this science?
Yeah, is this like flaky stuff?
Yeah.
Well, back in 2003, when we did the video, it was actually maturing really well, but it was still pretty young. Now we're, what year is this? 2011.
11. We're almost 12 now.
It has matured some, but it's actually turned into a business. There's a large effort that's going on. This was not quite a business. National Geographic and IBM got together. IBM put in the computers, National Geographic put in its big power, and they wanted to come up with a super map of where everyone has migrated in the world based on these things, with taking samples all over the world. That map you just saw is part of the output from their efforts. And you can go online and check this. You can go on to the Genographic project right there online, and you can see what they've done in terms of charting how people groups have moved. And this is due entirely to mitochondrial DNA passed down from mother to daughter, mother to daughter, mother to daughter, with slight changes over many, many generations. And you can see where those people are. It's a fascinating site.
It is fascinating.
And closer to home here in Utah, if you want to do some really advanced scientific genealogical studies, you can go to a center right in Salt Lake City that you can give them your DNA and your surname, basically, and they can help you find people in your tree. Here's a place you can go online to do this. If it's the Sorensen Molecular Genealogy Foundation, www.smgf.org. And those guys are amassing one of the best collections of mitochondrial and Y chromosome, that's the man connection, of DNA, to be able to go back and look at your ancestors and find people you missed on your genealogy tree.
Wow.
So it's very mainstream and it's very trusted and it's not fly by night.
And used in this culture, according to their genealogy. So since the DVD was released in 2003, has anything changed? Is the debate still the same?
Well, amazingly, no. It's taken a very strange turn.
Did it discredit DNA in the strange turn?
No, and that's the strange turn. The strange turn is that it actually strongly endorsed the DNA. But theoretically, see, here's the problem. If it's endorsing the DNA, isn't the DNA in conflict with the Book of Mormon? Yeah. So LDS apologists now suddenly are accepting this science hook, line, and sinker, but they're taking a slightly different approach. Let me show you this quote right here.
Okay.
Trent Stevens was in our DVD back in 2003, and here's a quote from him. Now remember, Trent Stevens has a background in biology, so he teaches Idaho State. He said that data from numerous molecular population genetic studies suggests that the ancestors of extant Native Americans came from Siberia. No genetic evidence specifically supports the hypothesis that Native Americans descended from the Middle Eastern populations. Furthermore, there's little reason to assume that additional data will reverse the current conclusions. Now, Trent Stevens is LDS. So suddenly it started where there was a lot of outcry against the science itself, science versus religion, that the science must be bad. Now all the apologists for the Book of Mormon pretty much are all pro-science of this DNA evidence.
So it's being accepted by both sides, but what about what explanation do they have? How are they defending the Book of Mormon through this?
And here's the strange turn. The strange turn is this. If the science is true, then something else has to give someplace else. And this is just something it has to give. Two things have to be true, and this is what Mormon apologists will talk about all the time. Two things must be true. Number one, when Lehi came to this hemisphere in 600 BC, it was already totally overrun with thousands of previous inhabitants. And then number two, you have to have true that Lehi and his family never really amounted to much. They grew and stayed in an extraordinarily small geographic area, very small population. And if those two things are true, then it can fit the science. Then the science where we don't see any of their genes, actually you wouldn't expect to see any of their genes. So that's what they're pushing on right now. And as a result, that's what they spend all their time trying to find reason to believe, that there were people already here, a lot of people already here.
But the Book of Mormon doesn't back that idea.
Well, that's the problem. and so that's where we get into the conflict right now is how do you explain the fact? Now, and I've read a lot of LDS apologists saying, well, the Book of Mormon doesn't really say that there wasn't anybody here. I mean, it doesn't say it explicitly. But there's many passages that make your eyebrows go up. I mean, let me read a couple for you right here. This is from 2 Nephi 1. And this is Lehi talking about this new land he's just come to. It's a wonderful land. He says, and behold, it is wisdom that this land should be kept as yet from the knowledge of other nations. For behold, many nations would overrun the land, that there would be no place for an inheritance. So Lehi sounds like he's saying, well, it's a good thing no one's here because it'd be overrunning the land.
Right.
And this is when he first comes into the land.
So they weren't overrun by the land.
So he's looking around saying, well, it's a good thing no one else is here, is what he's saying. And the verse after that reinforces it, verse 9 in chapter 1. Wherefore I, Lehi, have obtained a promise that inasmuch as those whom the Lord God shall bring out of the land of Jerusalem, talking about himself, shall keep his commandments, they shall prosper upon the face of this land, and they shall be kept from all other nations, that they may possess this land unto themselves.
So we shouldn't be here.
So we shouldn't be here, I know. But very clearly, what he's saying as he looks at the land, he says, there's nobody else here. God has done that for us, and we are the only people here. And that's very straightforward in terms of what the Book of Mormon says about whether there were people here before.
You know, I was watching a PBS show a few days ago, and I caught part of an interview from a Native American. I don't remember the name of the tribe, but he says that he studied his people, and he says our people go back 36,000 years in the Americas. 36,000 years, and of course we're planning the show. You know, and I'm going, wait a minute, that would never fit in with the timeline of the Book of Mormon. Even if 36,000 years is too long, maybe it was only 6,000 years, it still doesn't fit in with the timeline of the Book of Mormon.
Yeah, it still doesn't fit. And we can talk about some more on the timeline because there's some tremendous problems with that. But
whoa. So what about the second condition? Did Lehi's family stay small and localized?
Well, and you know, I would invite callers to call in and contradict me on this, but when I read the Book of Mormon, it looks like they took off. It looks like they spread through the whole land. I'll just pull up a couple of verses and see if you disagree and you're reading the Book of Mormon. Let's start with 2 Nephi 1. No, let's do 2 Nephi 5. Let's do that.
Okay.
2 Nephi 5. It says, and the Lord was with us, and we did prosper exceedingly. Now, that doesn't sound small to me. It sounds like they really were making babies and spreading out. Jeremiah 1:8 is another one right here. It speaks in large terms. And we multiplied exceedingly and spread upon the face of the land. That does not sound like a small occupation.
It's not a small acreage like a farm or something.
Not small. It sounds big to me. I mean, come on, help me out here.
Yeah.
Omni 1:17. Let's look at this one. Omni 1:17. And at the time that Mosiah discovered them, they had become exceedingly numerous, rather than, they had about a handful of people in a little village someplace. That doesn't sound like. Helaman 3:8. Let's go there and see what that one says. And it came to pass that they did multiply and spread, and did go forth from the land southward to the land northward, and did spread insomuch that they began to cover the face of the whole earth, from the sea north to the sea south, sea north, from the sea west to the sea east.
So that's exceedingly. That's the exceedingly part we're talking about.
That sounds big to me. Now, I will defer to people who read the Book of Mormon more carefully than I do, because I think I know the Bible better than the Book of Mormon. I've read a lot of the Book of Mormon. But man, you know what? It paints this picture of Lehi coming. They had their problems. They fought here and there. But, you know, over time, they got bigger and bigger and bigger until the battles involved hundreds of thousands of people. I mean, it wasn't a small genetic footprint. It was a big thing that happened here, starting with Lehi, and then going through his sons and all the people who spawned from them.
So let's go back to the claims of early Mormon leaders, general authorities. They underscore, don't they, that the Lehi's descendants were widespread. They also said,
well, yeah,
they read it the way you read it.
They're good students of the Book of Mormon, and so they have been saying this for quite some time. I went and took a look at just a few. Here's from LeGrand Richards in 1954. He said the dark-skinned people who occupied this land of America from that time on were called Lamanites, who are the people known generally as the American Indians, all of whom are of the house of Israel.
That's very telling.
Well, you know, if I read the Book of Mormon, that's what I read too. I think LeGrand Richards is being faithful to the Book of Mormon when he reads that. Here's another one from James Talmage. James Talmage was a scientist, kind of like myself in training. He was trained in geology. I was trained in engineering. But, you know, so we're both neophytes in biology. But take a look at what Talmage says. He says, we believe that the existing Indian tribes are all direct descendants of Lehi and his company, and that therefore they have sprung from men, all of whom were of the house of Israel.
Okay, that's all-encompassing again.
That's all-encompassing. Let me give you one more quote here. This is from Hiram G. Smith, and he says this. He says, the blood of Manasseh is found in the tribes and nations of the Indians of North and South America.
So both continents?
Both continents. So spread out. So he gives us the large geography even when it says that. It's not just a tiny thing. So, and we could come up with dozens of other quotes. I mean, they're just all over the place. The general authorities of the church, up until DNA, all said that if you find a Native American in the Americas, you're looking at a blood descendant of Lehi.
Yeah. You know, I read a remark, of course, a lot of remarks as we were going through some of this, and one of the remarks mentioned that any time that a Mormon mentions the limited geography theory, which is the small area that they would have occupied, that it's that's the excuse for the Native Americans, that they have actually rejected their own prophets. That they can't be taken seriously because their prophets, just like you have quoted here, they've all said this. Like you said, there's dozens of quotes we could have used that proves that they that the whole both continents included the Lamanites.
This is not a fringe theory. This is a core backbone of Mormon thought.
So either the prophets were wrong, or the Book of Mormon is wrong. Maybe both even. Or both. And the DNA, of course, is a science that has been proven to be true over and over again. So does God know how to choose his prophets? I mean, does he not know how to choose prophets that will
I don't know, but we do have a very fundamental problem here. You have a science saying that these people do not come from Israel, and all the samples. There's not a single sample that says they come from Israel, and yet you have the general authorities in the Book of Mormon saying, no, they all came from Israel. So who's right? Well, you have to go back to that two-point thing. They were swamped out by previous people that were here, which is against the Book of Mormon. And Lehi's occupation had to be a very small one.
And
that doesn't fit either.
So it's against what the Book of Mormon says and what the prophets
and the prophets. And the prophets' interpretation.
So during this huge growth, does the Book of Mormon support a literal blood ancestry back to Lehi? Yeah,
and you know, a lot of the popular discussion today is to call Lamanites not blood Lamanites. Like a Lamanite means just someone who doesn't follow Jesus. But, you know, the Book of Mormon doesn't talk like that.
Not at all.
Take a look at this. 3 Nephi 5, it says right this, I am Mormon, this is Mormon speaking, I am Mormon and a pure descendant of Lehi. That's a bloodline thing. That's not just a generic descendant kind of stuff. And then Nephi himself prophesies regarding the reception of the Book of Mormon, that was going to come through Joseph Smith. He prophesies about the effect this is going to have on the Lamanites in our present day. And he prophesies about that in 2 Nephi. So take a look at this. He says, "And now I would prophesy somewhat more concerning the Jews and the Gentiles. For after the book of which I've spoken," that's the Book of Mormon, "shall come forth and be written unto the Gentiles and sealed up again unto the Lord, there shall be many which shall believe the words which are written, and they shall carry them forth unto the remnant of our seed." Now this is the blood descendants. "And then shall the remnant of our seed know concerning us how we came out from Jerusalem, and that they are descendants of the Jews." So Nephi is speaking forward to the present, saying there will be descendants of the Jews as Lamanites when the Book of Mormon comes forth.
Well,
it's the backbone message of the Book of Mormon.
You can't deny what that is. Well, what about the current literature the LDS Church puts out? Does it support the? In
a few places, Gospel Principles is one I go to all the time. And a new version of Gospel Principles came out in 2009, I think it was. And it says this in one short section. This is a precursor of the return of Jesus. It says, "Great numbers of Lehi's descendants are now receiving the blessings of the gospel." Great numbers of Lehi's descendants. Lehi is the father by blood. So yeah. So that's got to happen before Jesus comes back.
So how can the apologists propose this as the answer?
Well, the problem is this is the only scientifically viable explanation. You got to have a big pre-existing population and a tiny, tiny plant from Lehi. There are no other alternatives. There's no other alternatives. If you accept the science full, which the LDS apologists do, then what they're going to have to do is they're going to have to go through the Book of Mormon and try and interpret it from a revisionist perspective and comb it with a fine-tooth comb and look for any hints that there were other people here in huge masses and that Lehi's occupation was very small. And they come through with the silliest arguments, I have to tell you. But they spend most of their time now looking at the Book of Mormon and saying, oh, there's something that might allow possibly for there being other people here, although they're not named.
They're not, and so they're not.
So that's where the argument has moved to, is not picking apart the science, but picking apart the Book of Mormon so it'll fit the only scientifically plausible explanation. Unfortunately, you have to do violence to the Book of Mormon, and you have to do violence to what the general authorities have said.
Blake Ostler said in the 2004 Sunstone magazine, he said, recognizing that DNA arguments against the Book of Mormon are invalid and unsound demonstrates that those who rely on DNA evidence to discredit the Book of Mormon are claiming more than they can know.
True. Oh boy, that's really true. Yeah, that's really true.
So are we claiming more than we can know by talking about this DNA with that?
No, because what we do know is if I pull DNA out of an American Indian now, it matches DNA in Siberia. That's a fact.
That's a fact.
And no one disputes that. And when I pick that DNA out of Native Americans now and look for DNA that we well know comes out of the Middle East, there's not a single one that's been found yet.
Okay, interesting.
So.
Well, we are past halftime here,
yeah,
so we better open up the phone lines. It looks like we've got some calls coming in. Our phone number is 801-973-8820, and we do have our halftime message ready for you as we wait for the phone calls to come in.
You are watching Polygamy, What Love Is This? Broadcasting live from Salt Lake City, Utah. This program is the broadcast outreach of a Shield and Refuge ministry. Shield and Refuge is a point of first contact for Mormon fundamentalists who question the doctrines of the religion or who are actively seeking for an opportunity to escape the polygamist lifestyle. Examining the claims of fundamentalist doctrine against the backdrop of biblical truth is central to our efforts. We invite you to contact us. Call toll-free at 877-425-9993 or email us at tv@aboutpolygamy.com. You are welcome to join us in our monthly support group, Life After Polygamy, where you can meet others like yourself who are searching for answers about polygamy and Mormon fundamentalism. We meet monthly in the Salt Lake City area. For more details about time and place, call us toll-free at 877-425-9993 or email us at tv@aboutpolygamy.com. We want you to know that we've made available to you some outstanding resources free of charge. You will find them at our website, www.whatloveisthis.tv. There you will find the DVD, Lifting the Veil of Polygamy, which documents the real-life stories told firsthand of those who were lifted out of the culture of polygamy through the power and love of Jesus Christ. Also, free of charge to you is the booklet, Is Polygamy Biblical? It explores plural marriage in the context of God's Word and answers questions like, did God ever command polygamy? Is it part of God's plan? While you are at our website, make sure to take advantage of the archived episodes of this program, which can stream on demand directly to your computer. There are more than 100 shows to choose from. And if someone you know is unable to view this program via live broadcast, recommend that they visit this same website every Thursday at 8 p.m. Mountain Time to watch this show through live streaming video. Simply follow the links to the live streaming video page. If you are watching live tonight, we invite you to call us as we open our phone lines. The number is 801-973-TV20. That's 801-973-8820. Now, back to Polygamy, What Love Is This? With our host, Doris Hanson.
Welcome back to our show. We are discussing DNA and the issues with the Book of Mormon with Jim Catlin, the pastor of the church in Main Street Church in Brigham City, who has done a lot of study, a lot of research on this issue that is trying to reconcile with some of the problems where the Book of Mormon claims that all of the Lamanites are of Hebrew descent, and the DNA proves otherwise. So that's what we've been talking about tonight.
Hard to refute. That's the problem.
It's hard to refute the facts. So we do have a couple of phone calls waiting. We'll go to line 2 with Yvonne in Layton. Hello, Yvonne?
Yes.
Yes, you're on the air.
Okay, thank you. I had a couple of Mormon missionaries tell me that Joseph Smith was a descendant of Joseph of Egypt, and I asked them how they knew this, and they said through DNA. Have you heard, either one of you heard anything about this?
I've not heard that before.
Not through DNA, because I don't think anyone has sampled Joseph Smith's DNA. So I don't know how they can say that.
I don't know how they could.
I think, although it's common knowledge that the Mormons will tell you that he is from that line, but not because of DNA.
Yeah, he claims he's from the line of Ephraim, which is one of Joseph's sons.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, they came right out and told me it was through DNA that they knew this.
Well, that's interesting.
I think that's totally wrong.
Yeah, well, you know, and for somebody who's watching the show, if you know if the Mormons are trained to say that or not trained to say that, maybe you could call in and give us some information on that, too.
Yeah, well, there's a couple of Mormon missionaries that told me this.
Yeah, yeah. Interesting. Well, thanks for calling in.
Yeah, well, I told them they were full of baloney, so...
Well...
I asked them how they would get DNA from Joseph of Egypt, and they couldn't tell me that. And I told them they were full of baloney, so...
Okay, well, we appreciate...
Well, next time they come, ask them if they know about the DNA of Lamanites and Native Americans.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Yvonne. Bye. Okay, we have Tyson calling from Sandy. Hello, Tyson.
Yeah.
Yes, you're on the air.
Oh, okay. Sounds good. Is this Doris?
This is Doris.
Hey. Sorry, I'm kind of diverting off the DNA thing, but I just wanted to ask, where are some of the best places to locate evidence of Joseph Smith's polyandrous wives that he had that would be within church records?
There is a book called In Sacred Loneliness written by Todd Compton. And Todd Compton is a member in good standing in the Mormon Church.
Okay.
And he has...
In Sacred Loneliness.
In
is that
Sacred
the only
Loneliness.
place to find it, or is it elsewhere?
You can find it all over the internet. You can find it in George A. Smith?
George Smith's book.
Or George D. Smith. I can't even remember which one.
George D?
Nauvoo Polygamy.
Yeah.
Okay.
That also talks about it.
Yeah, that really covers all the polygamy in Nauvoo pre-wilderness out here in Utah, which most people didn't know it existed. So.
Right.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing because I didn't know that existed until maybe a couple of years ago. And then I remember I found some of it, but I was talking to one of my brothers about it, and he's like, "Oh no, that's not true." That's not
yes.
True. I'm like, "No, it is seriously."
He had 11 women that he married who were married to other living husbands and living with them. That's 11. 11 polyandrous wives.
Wow, and weren't his first 9 of 12 polyandrous as well? Something like that?
I didn't catch the question.
Within the first dozen women that he married, I believe the majority of them were polyandrous relationships. I think it was 8 or 9.
No, I don't think the majority of them were. I couldn't say exactly how many. Don't have the book in front of me either, but
okay.
I don't think that's true.
All right, well, thanks. I love your show. It's been very informative.
Good, thank you. Thanks for calling.
See ya.
Mm-hmm. Bye. Okay, line 1, Karen is calling. Hello, Karen.
Yes.
You're on the air. You're on the air, Karen.
Yes, I got my DNA done, and I'm haplotype X.
Right.
And I was told that I was the same as the Kennewick man. And my mother is Ojibwa and Sioux, and my father is has Apache blood. And I was told by some people in the LDS Church that if I was haplotype X, then that meant I was a direct descendant from Raymond and Lemuel. And I said, okay, so you're European, right? And they said, well, yes. And I said, so how come you don't look Sicilian? They said, well, I'm not. My ancestors are from Sweden. And I said, well, if you think all Indians are from the same person, why don't all you European people look alike? Aren't you from the same person? Wouldn't you have be the same haplotype? If all Indians are the same haplotype and come from the same 3 people, don't all Europeans come from the same haplotype and the same 3 people?
Well,
how come you guys think we all look alike?
I'm not surprised you tested out as X, because X is not one of the 4 principal Native American haplotypes in the New World.
Well, but see, I was told that the Kennewick man was also haplotype X, and he was like a caveman or something, clear up in Washington State.
Right. Yeah,
it's an ancient Indian one, and which makes sense because, my mother's ancestors were extremely old people. I mean, my mother's father was 45 when she was born, and his father was born right after the Civil War. So my great-grandfather was born right after the Civil War. And,
right.
I mean, they were just very ancient people. And it just surprises me that all Caucasian people think all Native Americans look alike. And if you don't look like the Native Americans that live in their forest, then you are not a Native American. And yet, I don't know why when they find out that you're haplotype X, that all of a sudden you're their Indian.
Well, I'll tell you this: if your mother's 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 mother came from Scandinavia, I can almost guarantee you'll have an X haplotype.
I think so. Well, I just don't understand why. It doesn't make sense to me why you can tell them what your haplotype is, and then they all of a sudden think that you're their Indian.
No, I wouldn't go there at all.
Okay, Karen, thank you. We got another call coming in.
Okay,
thank you for your
Bye-bye.
call. Bye. Okay, we have John calling from Caseville. Hello, John.
Hello.
Yes, you're on the air, John. What's your question?
Well, I've just got a response. I've got a gentleman directed me to a book called The History of the American Indian by James Adair. And this book, the author tries to convince us that the Indians are direct descendants of the Jews. This was written in 1730, between 1730 and 1760, was published in 1775. But many people believe this is where Joseph Smith got his ideas about the descendancy of the Indians. and the Jews from this book.
Yeah, well, that was pretty popular in those times.
Yeah, I don't
it?
think most people understand that was the talk of the town during Joseph Smith's time and for 50 years before. I mean, a lot of Europeans came to this continent and they saw these Native Americans and said, "Holy smokes, where'd these guys come from?" And that was the dinner table conversation for decades. And so really the most popular thinking was they're Jews because they kind of look Jewish facially. But that was real popular. It was in almost all the writings. About 5 years, 10 years prior to Joseph Smith writing the Book of Mormon, there was a very popular fictional novel that came out of the area in upstate New York where Joseph lived called View of the Hebrews, and that's what it was all about. And it was just, boy, it went through several printings. It was very popular. So it was not Joseph Smith didn't make this one up. That was the climate of the time.
Are you there, John?
I am, yes.
Okay.
You can Google that book on, the whole book's on the internet. You can Google it, The History of American Indian by James Adair, and read through it. It's interesting.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
A lot of his ideas are what Joseph Smith taught about the Book of Mormon.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
Well, people think that
I think he got those ideas from this book.
Yeah. Okay, well, thanks again for your call.
All right.
Bye. Okay, we have Galen calling from Salt Lake City. Hello, Galen. Galen.
Hello?
Yes, you're on the air.
This has been very interesting. The question the point I'd like to bring out is if Mormonism proves to be wrong, of course, the evidence you're presenting here tonight is devastating. However, on the other hand, if Mormonism down the road proves to be right, then there's got to be something seriously wrong with DNA and its perfect aspect in terms of what you can gain from it. And that's about the only way a Latter-day Saint could probably argue today. But this is very interesting. I'm enjoying it very much. Thank you. Just give me a comment on that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think, Galen, you got to remember, too, that I have not read yet an LDS scientist who disagrees with the mitochondrial DNA evidence. Whoops, we might have lost him. So anyway, it's widely accepted. It's not in dispute.
But what they're trying to do is scramble to bring the Book of Mormon in line with the evidence.
Right, by kind of doing this revisionist interpretation of the Book of Mormon that goes against all the general authorities for 180 years.
You know, some of the stuff I've been reading, though, from some of the Mormon apologists, is as they're actually trying to hurt some of the, like Trent, for instance, you quoted him. There have been some negative remarks made by the Mormon apologists about him that he's not quite getting it just right, you know. So they're attacking the character and the veracity of their what they say too. So you know, we don't have a lot of time left, but I thought I would ask you a question. We've got maybe a couple of minutes. The first question I want to ask you is, if our viewers want to study this more, where can they go to find and do which they should do their own study on this? Can you give?
Let me really give you some quick ones. Let me put up some slides here. First one is this one right here. See if it's going to go up. If you want to do more on the science, go to this Simon Southerton's book, Losing a Lost Tribe. That's the book that I reviewed about the time our DVD came out. If you want science that's accessible from a layman's perspective, you'll love this book. It goes into details, and Simon Southerton comes out of the Mormon Church, so that's a great one. Here's another one right here I'll put up, and this is an excellent resource. There it is. Sunstone Magazine, and I know Sunstone doesn't have a real good rep for a lot of people. It's like, Satan writes Sunstone, but that's not true. There's some good thinking in Sunstone. But in issue 131, which is back in March of 2004, two great articles. Brent Metcalf did one where he looked at all the problems with the Book of Mormon in terms of the small geography and all that kind of issue. I really recommend that. And Trent Stevens, who I quoted from before, it came out of that article, and I want you to go back and read how he justifies that, because what I read to you, he wrote in the first paragraph of a very long thing, and the title of his essay is What Next? It's like, so what do we do now? So take a look at that. But you can see those online. Just go to Sunstone Magazine online. Okay. And then, to kind of cap this off, I understand that there is a lost tribe. Of course, no tribes are really lost, but they call them the lost tribes of Israel, has been found using DNA. Who are they, and what happened? This is fascinating, because a lost tribe was found that was connected to Israel somewhere in the world. For a long time, there was a black-skinned Bantu-speaking tribe in Zimbabwe called the Lemba. And the Lemba are down there claiming for generation after generation that we are descended from the Jews, and no one believed them, even though they had tidbits of cultural things and a little bit of language and circumcision. And we're from the Jews. And then someone with DNA finally said, you know what? We can test this. So they tested it. They went through the male line, which is the Y chromosomes. They checked it out. Sure enough, 70% of these black-skinned Bantu-speaking Africans have Semitic Y chromosomes, which means they came from the Middle East. And inside their tribe, they have separate clans. One particular clan who claimed to be kind of the leaders in the past, they checked their DNA and found out that they actually, more than half of them, have actually the Cohen Y chromosome. That's
Takes them to the
that's
priesthood.
the one from the priesthood itself.
The priesthood line.
Is that crazy or what?
It's funny. And you know, I think when I first heard this, that it's God's poetic justice, because the Mormons actually denied the priesthood authority to the blacks in the beginning. And here the black tribe is for thousands of years have already had the priesthood.
Saying we have the proof in our blood that we are priests.
That's true.
And they had to be forced to accept that.
Oh, it's funny, yeah. Well, God doesn't show favoritism, and that's for sure. And thank you, Jim, for being here.
Yeah,
we appreciate this information. We got most of it covered, and if you want to go online and find some more information, you can. You know, genuine Christianity will not compromise when the wolf, dressed up like a sheep, invades the flock. And Jesus warned us about that wolf. What is so strange is that the Mormon wolf didn't at first want to be aligned with Christianity, and we're not sure why that happened and what changed. But true Christians accept only the Bible as God's final word of truth, and we can't accept anything as truth that contradicts what the Bible teaches, and that includes all of the Bible, not just part of it. All of Mormonism in one way or another fails to measure up to biblical doctrine. And as we discussed tonight, the Book of Mormon has failed to measure up to its own claims. When God promised that His word would forever be true, He not only meant it, He had the power to see to it that happened. It was the snake in the Garden of Eden that first cast doubt on what God said and what He meant when He said it. Now, we don't want to know that our loved ones or anyone falls for the same lies that caused the fall of the human race. So we urge everyone just to believe God. Jesus said the greatest commandment was to love the Lord thy God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Are you loving God with all your mind, or with someone else's mind as they tell you what to think and what to believe? Loving God with all our mind includes studying all sides of all of the issues, including the DNA relative to the Book of Mormon claims. So study and test and research and trust, believing God without doubting Him. Now, God didn't need Joseph Smith. God didn't need another testament of Jesus Christ, because everything we know about Jesus was already written in the Bible. Peter said that the Bible is all we need for life and godliness. So trust God, trust His word, trust His integrity. God says there's only one faith, and that is the faith as described in the Bible alone. Thanks for watching. Good night.